Throw away because half my family has my main account, but I need honest opinions. AITA for confronting my mom about the $47,000 she's secretly given my sister over the last 6 years, while telling me for just as long that she doesn't have anything extra to spare. Before I explain, if you've ever found out money in your family wasn't as tight as you were told, hit subscribe and drop a comment with your verdict at the end. This one has a very specific number attached to it, and I promise the math matters. Here's what happened. My mom, Sandra, raised my sister Kayla and me mostly on her own after our parents split when I was 12. She worked hard, retrained as a medical biller in her 40s, and built a stable, modest life for us. Money was genuinely tight when we were kids, and I grew up understanding that we didn't ask for extra, because there usually wasn't extra to give. I remember specific years clearly: generic brand cereal, a single family vacation in my entire childhood, a proudly worn second-hand winter coat I didn't realize was second-hand until a classmate pointed it out in 4th grade. I don't say any of this with resentment. Mom worked incredibly hard, took on extra shifts, went back to school in her 40s while still raising 2 kids, and I've always admired her for it. That admiration is actually part of why none of what I found later made any sense to me at first. It didn't fit the mother I thought I knew, the one who'd taught me explicitly that you don't spend what you don't have. That understanding followed me into adulthood. When I got married 8 years ago, I asked Mom if she could contribute anything toward the wedding, even a small amount, mostly because it felt like the kind of thing a mother does if she can. She told me gently but clearly that she just didn't have it to spare that year between her mortgage and some unexpected medical bills. I told her not to worry about it, genuinely meant it, and never brought it up again. I think about that moment often now, how easily I accepted it, how quickly "don't worry about it" became my automatic response to any hint of financial strain in her voice. Paul used to gently tease me early in our marriage about how fast I'd wave off anything that sounded like it might cost my mother something, emotionally or financially. I always framed it as consideration. Looking back, I wonder how much of it was actually consideration, and how much was just a well-worn groove I'd been walking since childhood, one I never thought to question because questioning it had simply never occurred to me as an option. 3 years ago, when my husband Paul and I were closing on our first house, I mentioned to Mom, mostly just making conversation, how stressful the closing costs were. She said the same thing, almost word for word. "I wish I could help, honey, but I just don't have anything extra right now." Again, I didn't push. I've never wanted to be the kind of daughter who makes her mother feel guilty about money. Kayla, meanwhile, seemed to just have things. A newer car every few years. A nice 1-bedroom apartment downtown on a receptionist's salary that never quite added up to me, though I never asked too many questions because that felt like my business to stay out of. I told myself she was probably just better with money than I was, or maybe had a boyfriend helping out here and there. I genuinely never suspected the actual explanation. That assumption held steady for years, right up until this past spring, when Mom had a minor health scare, a fall that led to a hospital stay and a lot of unfamiliar paperwork. And I offered to help her get her finances organized while she recovered, mostly out of genuine concern, not suspicion. I want to be completely clear about that. I wasn't looking for anything when I sat down at her kitchen table with 6 years of bank statements. I was just trying to help my mother the way any daughter would. I want to lay out the pattern here because I think the specific instances matter more than a vague feeling of unfairness, and because some of you are going to assume I'm exaggerating unless I show my work. There was the wedding contribution I asked about 8 years ago, declined because money was tight. There was the closing costs conversation 3 years ago, same answer, same gentle apology. There was a car repair 4 years ago, an $1,100 transmission issue that came at a genuinely bad time financially for Paul and me. When I mentioned it to Mom, mostly just venting, not even directly asking for help. And she said, "I know how that feels, sweetheart. I really wish I could help more than I can right now." There was a moment, about 2 years ago, when our older daughter needed a fairly expensive dental procedure not fully covered by insurance, and I asked Mom directly this time if she could help with even half. She said she'd think about it, and then, a week later, told me she'd looked at her budget and just couldn't make it work without dipping into savings I really need to protect. Each of these, on their own, felt completely reasonable. My mom is a single, retired woman on a fixed income. Of course, she couldn't help with everything. I never once resented her for it, not really, because I genuinely believed the story she was telling me, the same story she'd apparently been telling herself for years too, I'd later learn. Kayla's life over that same period looked different in ways I noticed but never fully questioned. She got a newer car 3 separate times in 6 years, always paid off outright as far as I knew, never financed. She moved into a nicer apartment downtown 2 years ago, in a building I knew for a fact was well above what a receptionist's salary could comfortably support. She took a 2-week trip to Europe last year that she described, vaguely, as finally treating myself after a rough year, without ever specifying what the rough year actually involved. There was also her 30th birthday 4 years ago, a dinner Mom hosted at a genuinely nice restaurant downtown, the kind of place with a wine list that made my own eyes widen a little at the prices. I remember thinking at the time that it was a lovely, generous gesture for a milestone birthday, and not questioning where the money for it came from, the same way you don't question a gift, you just receive it gratefully and move on with your evening. There was also a smaller thing, easy to forget until I started actually reconstructing the timeline. Mom mentioning once at a family dinner that she'd helped Kayla out a little with a security deposit when she moved into the new apartment. I remember thinking at the time that a little probably meant a few $100s, the kind of small parental gesture that felt completely normal and not worth a second thought. I asked her once, casually, how she managed the apartment on her salary. She laughed and said something about budgeting really aggressively, and changed the subject fast enough that I noticed the speed more than the answer, the same way you notice these things in hindsight and wonder why you didn't notice them the first time. I never once thought to compare notes with my mother's actual finances because why would I? She'd told me consistently for years exactly how tight things were. I had no reason at the time to think I was being told 2 different versions of the same story. I sat down at Mom's kitchen table on a Tuesday afternoon in April, laptop open, 6 years of digital bank statements pulled up, so I could help her set up a simpler budgeting system and make sure her bills were actually getting paid on time, since the fall had left her a little more rattled than she wanted to admit. I wasn't looking for anything. I want to say that again because it matters. I was categorizing transactions, mortgage, utilities, groceries, the ordinary architecture of someone's financial life, when I started noticing a recurring transfer, roughly every month or two, sometimes $300, sometimes $800, occasionally larger, always going to the same account, labeled inconsistently. Kayla gift, help, or sometimes nothing at all. I almost didn't think anything of it at first. Parents help their adult kids sometimes, I told myself that's normal, that's fine. But the transfers kept appearing month after month, going back further than I expected, and I found myself, almost without deciding to, opening a spreadsheet and starting to add them up, mostly out of simple curiosity about how far back the pattern went. It went back 6 years. The total, once I finished adding every single transfer I could find, came to just over $47,000. I sat completely still at that kitchen table for a long moment, staring at a number that didn't match anything I'd been told for 6 consecutive years about how tight money actually was. I want to be honest about my first reaction because it wasn't anger, not yet. It was confusion, a kind of dizzy, off-balance feeling, like I'd been reading a book in a language I thought I understood and suddenly realized half the words meant something completely different than I'd assumed. I actually got up from the table at one point and made myself a cup of tea I never drank, just to have something ordinary to do with my hands while my brain tried to catch up with what my eyes had already seen. I remember standing at Mom's kitchen counter, the same counter I'd done homework on as a kid, staring at a kettle, thinking about every single time I'd told Paul, "It's fine, Mom just doesn't have it," and quietly, generously believed my own reassurance. I scrolled further back, almost compulsively at that point, cross-referencing dates against my own memory, and that's when I found the detail that actually knocked the wind out of me. 8 years ago, the same month I'd asked Mom for help with my wedding and been told, gently, that she just didn't have anything extra to spare, there was a transfer to Kayla, dated 4 days later, for $3,000, labeled moving expenses. 4 days. The same month, while I was told in almost the exact same breath that there simply wasn't anything left to give. Mom was napping in the next room, recovering from the fall, and I sat there with her laptop open, a spreadsheet full of numbers I didn't fully know what to do with yet, trying to decide whether to wake her up right then and ask, or whether I needed more time to understand what I was actually looking at before I said a single word. I closed the laptop quietly and drove home without waking her, needing time to think before I said anything I couldn't take back. I told Paul everything that night: the spreadsheet, the $47,000, the 4-day gap between my wedding request and Kayla's moving expenses. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "I don't know what to say," he finally admitted. "I mean, I do, actually. I think you need to understand why before you decide how angry to be. There might be a real explanation. There might not be, but I don't think you can sit with a number like that without asking." He asked me gently whether I wanted him to come with me for either conversation, or whether this felt like something I needed to do on my own first. I told him I needed to start alone, at least with Kayla, though I appreciated him offering, and meant it more than I probably said out loud that night. I spent the next several days in a strange, unsettled state, going through ordinary life, work, the kids' school pickups, dinner, while running the math over and over in my head, trying to figure out what I actually wanted to know, separate from what I was afraid to find out. I called my friend Bethany, who's known my family for almost 20 years and has always had a clear-eyed way of seeing things I sometimes miss because I'm too close to them. "Honestly, Jenna," she said after I explained everything, "I've always wondered, a little watching Kayla's apartment and her car situation over the years, whether your mom was helping more than anyone let on. I never said anything because it wasn't my business, and I figured if it was happening, you probably knew about it too." That stung more than I expected, the idea that this might have been visible to people outside my own family before it was visible to me. "Do you think I'm overreacting?" I asked her, needing an honest answer more than a sympathetic one. "I think you're allowed to be upset about being lied to for 6 years," she said. "Whether the money went somewhere legitimate or not is almost a separate question from that. You can hold both things at once: that your sister might have genuinely needed help, and that you deserved honesty about your own situation regardless." I want to be honest that I went back and forth more than once that week on whether confronting either of them was even the right move, or whether I should just quietly let it go, protect the peace, the way I'd apparently been trained to do around money in this family for my entire life. I decided in the end that quietly letting it go was exactly the pattern that had let this continue, unspoken, for 6 years, and that I owed myself at least an honest conversation, even if I never fully liked the answer. I decided I needed 2 conversations, not one. First, I wanted to talk to Kayla directly, give her a chance to explain her side before I said anything to Mom, partly out of fairness, and partly, I'll admit, because some small part of me was hoping she'd tell me something that made the whole thing make sense in a way that didn't feel like a 6-year betrayal. I texted her, asking if we could get coffee, just the 2 of us. She said sure, seemed completely normal about it, which somehow made the version of this conversation I was about to feel even stranger, like I was about to detonate something in a room where everyone else thought they were just getting coffee. We met at a coffee shop near her apartment, the same apartment I now understood cost more than she could reasonably afford on her own salary. She looked completely relaxed until I set my phone on the table, spreadsheet pulled up, and asked her, as calmly as I could manage, whether she knew how much money Mom had given her over the past 6 years. Her face changed immediately. "Where did you get that?" "I was helping Mom organize her finances after the fall. I wasn't looking for this, I found it. $47,000, Kayla." While she was telling me the entire time that she didn't have anything extra. She was quiet for a long moment, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table, a habit I realized that ran in the family more than I'd noticed before. "It wasn't like I asked for all of that at once," she finally said. "It was little bits here and there whenever things got hard. You don't know what the last several years have actually been like for me, Jenna. You've had Paul, a stable job, a house. I was struggling a lot more than I ever let on, and Mom knew and she helped, and I don't think that makes either of us monsters." "I'm not saying you're a monster," I said. "I'm saying I was told repeatedly for 6 years that there wasn't anything extra to give, while there very clearly was, just not for me. That's a different problem than whether you needed help." She didn't have a clean answer for that. She admitted eventually that some of the money had gone toward genuine struggles, a period of underemployment 2 years ago she'd never fully told the family about, some credit card debt from an earlier relationship. But she also admitted more quietly that some of it, the car, at least one of the vacations, hadn't been about struggling so much as mom simply offering, unprompted, more often than Kayla ever expected or specifically asked for. "I didn't know she was telling you no this whole time," Kayla said. "I swear, Jenna, I didn't know that part. I just knew she was helping me and I didn't think to ask what that meant for anyone else." "Would it have changed anything if you had known?" I asked her. She thought about that for longer than I expected before answering. "Honestly, I don't know. I think I would have felt guilty and I think I might have said something to mom about it. But I also think I was in survival mode for a lot of those years. And survival mode doesn't leave a lot of room for wondering whether your sister's getting an equal version of help you didn't even know was optional." I believed her mostly on that specific point. "I don't think Kayla set out to deceive me. I think she simply never had a reason to ask the question. I just spent a week not being able to stop asking. We didn't resolve anything at that coffee shop, not really. But it gave me something I needed before the harder conversation. A clearer sense that this wasn't a coordinated deception between the two of them, just two separate, unexamined patterns that had quietly run parallel to each other for years, never actually compared side by side until I forced the comparison myself. I waited until mom was fully recovered before I brought it up, not wanting the conversation to happen while she was still physically fragile from the fall. We sat at the same kitchen table where I'd found the spreadsheet in the first place, which felt appropriate, if a little cruel. I didn't lead with anger, I led with the number. "Mom, I found the transfers to Kayla while I was organizing your accounts. $47,000 over 6 years. I need you to help me understand that because it doesn't match what you've told me for that same 6 years, every single time I've asked you for help with anything." Her face went through several things at once: surprise, then something that looked almost like relief, the specific relief of a secret finally being spoken out loud instead of carried alone. "I always meant to explain it to you eventually," she said. "I just never found a good moment and then too much time had passed and it felt harder to bring up the longer I waited." "Try now," I said. She was quiet for a long moment, and then she told me something I hadn't fully known. That Kayla had gone through a genuinely difficult stretch starting about 7 years ago. A relationship that had turned emotionally, though not physically, abusive, one Kayla had never told me the full extent of, and that had left her financially and emotionally depleted by the time she finally got out of it. "I started helping her because I was scared for her," Mom said. "I didn't want to make a big announcement about it because I didn't want to embarrass her or make it a whole family conversation about what she'd been through. It started as genuine emergency help, and then I think it just became a habit. An easy way to keep helping her feel steady, long after the actual emergency had passed. And when I asked you for help with the wedding, the house, Sophie's dental work, what was happening then?" She didn't answer right away. "I think," she finally said, "I always saw you as the one who'd be okay no matter what. You've always been steady, Jenna, resourceful, married to someone stable. I saw Kayla as the one who needed catching over and over, and I got so used to thinking of the two of you that way that I stopped actually checking whether it was still true or whether it was fair. It was never fair, Mom. Not because Kayla didn't need help, because I was told a version of our finances that wasn't real every single time I asked for anything for 6 years, while a very different version was true for her. I think some part of me also worried," she added, quieter now, "that if I helped you the way I helped Kayla, you'd think less of yourself for needing it, because you'd built your whole identity around being the one who managed fine without it. I told myself I was respecting your independence. I'm starting to realize I might have just been protecting myself from a harder conversation." She started crying at that, the specific kind of crying that comes from finally hearing your own patterns said back to you plainly, without room to reframe it as something smaller than it was. "I don't know how to fix 6 years," she said. "I don't know what an apology even covers at this point." "I don't either," I told her honestly. "But I think it starts with actually seeing me clearly, instead of just seeing me as the daughter who doesn't need seeing." That conversation didn't resolve everything in one afternoon, and I don't think 6 years of an unexamined pattern should resolve in one afternoon. But it was the first real, honest conversation about money my mother and I have had in longer than I can remember. Edit, about 2 months later since a few people asked for an update. Mom and I have talked several more times since that day at the kitchen table. She told Kayla finally that I knew about the transfers, and the three of us had one difficult, occasionally tearful conversation together about all of it. The relationship Kayla had never fully disclosed, the pattern Mom had fallen into without examining it, my own years of quietly accepting "we don't have it" as a complete answer instead of asking harder questions. Mom has started being direct with both of us now about what she can and can't actually help with, and why, instead of a blanket "I don't have it," that turned out to mean different things depending on who was asking. She helped Paul and me for the first time in 8 years with a genuinely needed car repair last month. $300, not a huge amount, but the first time in a long time that "let me help with that" was actually true instead of a story reserved for someone else. I also started therapy, actually, a few weeks after that conversation with Mom, mostly to untangle a pattern I recognized in myself once I saw it clearly. A lifelong habit of not asking for things, assuming the answer would be no before I ever gave anyone the chance to say yes. My therapist pointed out, gently, that I'd essentially spent 30 years pre-rejecting myself on Mom's behalf, and that finding out I'd been right about the no for the wrong reasons was, in its own strange way, almost harder to sit with than if I'd simply been wrong. Kayla and I are still working through it. We talk more openly now about money than we ever did before, which has been uncomfortable in a useful way. She's paying Mom back a portion of it slowly, not because Mom asked her to, but because Kayla said she needed to, for her own sense of having actually stood on her own at some point. Mom and Kayla have also started being more open with the extended family in small ways about what those difficult years actually involved, instead of the vague, unspoken tension I think most of us sensed but never named. My grandmother, who's 81 and doesn't miss much, told me at Easter that she'd wondered for years why Kayla seemed to need extra looking after, and was relieved someone had finally said the actual words out loud instead of everyone just quietly managing around an unspoken situation. I don't regret finding out. I don't regret asking. I do wish, honestly, that I'd asked years earlier, instead of quietly accepting a story that made me the low-maintenance daughter who didn't need anything, when the truth was simply that I'd never been offered the chance to need something and be told yes. So, would love an honest verdict. AITA for confronting my mom about the $47,000, given that some of it genuinely went toward Kayla getting through something serious. Or was I within reason to expect the same honesty about money that I was apparently owed the entire time, regardless of what the money was actually for? If you've ever discovered your family's version of "we don't have it" wasn't quite the whole story, I'd love to hear how you handled it in the comments. Please like this video and subscribe for more real, honest family stories every week, Mama, but you look chocolates, did you?